So here is the study, the citation. It turns out that beetles are pollinating this Shorum parvifolia. This study took place in Malaysia at the Lambert Hills National Park, as you can see over here on the left side. If you can, I don't know if you can see the cursor. Anyway, but it's right here, and then it kind of looks like Malaysia's floating in the ocean, but it's not. It's attached right here and then on top of Indonesia. The two animals that they discovered when they were doing their study were thrips and beetles. They did identify a species of thrips, but not beetles. And here's the plant that they were looking at, Shorum parvifolia. And it's a very, very tall tree. It grows in swamps or even in dry land. It's native to the surrounding area. It's not threatened. It seems to have a long flower cycle, and the flowers only last for 1 day. And you can see in the picture here that there's a long trunk and then flowers and leaves at the top. It only provides pollen, no nectar. That's kind of interesting. Then they didn't have a hypothesis or hypotheses to study. They just wanted to go out and look at the trees and see what was going on, figure out how they were being pollinated. The methods, so what they did, they were there for about 3.5 years, and they captured nearby animals. Hopefully they were pollinators. And then they did a bit of an experiment to see if the flowers were self-pollinating or not. And they also had to collect flowers and fruits to answer various questions. Well, for the results, the animals they found, they kind of sounded like that. This is all they found was thrips and beetles, and very lot of beetles, and then fewer thrips. Overall, they used nets, at the canopy to catch the flying animals, and that's the top that they got more beetles and fewer thrips. But then, when flowers would fall to the ground, they pick the flowers and shake them, and count whatever came out. And generally, it was thrips. About the thrips, there were, as we said, less thrips than beetles, and they were in the flowers eating pollen. They would go into the flower when it opened, and they just kind of stay there until it fell into the ground. And so they were, kind of, just stayed, didn't fly around or anything. Then about the beetles, there were more, and they were eating pollen, and they were covered with pollen. They checked their stomachs and found pollen inside. And they also like to chew the petals of the flowers. And they were active at night, very, very active at night, and also during the day. They only had 24 hours, right, to get to the flowers. And then the thrips were also around day and night too. And you could see them flying around. That's why they were the ones that got caught in the nets, because they're out there flying around. Then they kind of did some experiments to see if the flowers would pollinate themselves or if they needed pollen from another plant, another tree. And so one thing they did was they took some flowers or had them just sitting there, and they captured a beetle or thrip from the net that were flying, and they put them inside of the flower and then tie it up. And it turned out that the beetle flowers had many more successful fruits than the thrips. And So what they were thinking from that was that the flowers probably needed to be cross pollinated. They needed to get pollen from somewhere else. And then the other thing is they wanted to see um, more about who was pollinating what, and they watched some flowers that were just open, and then other flowers that were that they had tied shut. And a lot of times, I guess thrips were inside of the ones that they just tied shut. And it turned out that the ones that they tied shut didn't have very many fruits. I think they said they had one fruit in the flowers that um, you know were all by themselves. But then the open pollinated, they had much better success. I think overall, with flowers and fruit, there was 70% of successful fruits of all that they saw. So after all that, they came to the conclusion that it was the beetles were the ones that were doing the pollinating because they were traveling around in the air and bringing pollen in from other places. And the thrips didn't do much flying; they just stayed in the flowers. And I guess thrips don't fly very well. They say they haven't got very good aim. So once they find a place where there's pollen, they just stick there, I guess. Anyway, let's see what. They figured it was the beetles because they came from other places. They were covered with pollen. Another thing that they noticed, and they were thinking about that probably for later for another study, but the beetles chewed the petals. They found very, very many flowers with chewed petals, and they thought perhaps that rather than being primarily considered with eating pollen, because they ate it and it was in their stomachs and everything, but also perhaps when they fly around and eat petals, that's when they were picking up the pollen and also and moving it to other flowers. So that was something kind of interesting. On one hand, they were actually picking up pollen deliberately, and the other thing, maybe they kept the pollen while they're busy eating the petals. Oh, that's it. That's it. And there's the beetle. He looks like he's been eating a lot of pollen. Okay. Well, thanks. Bye.